We're live, and we have Grackles here, and his dog. Hello. How are you doing today, Grackles?
I'm doing all right. Oh, hello. He's trying to lick my face. Okay, I'm gonna put you down now.
Hello, everyone in the chat. Navario, Nell, Ambrose, T-Rexus, or T-Rex. I always say T-Rexus because that's how I originally read it. But hello, Andrew. Welcome, everyone.
Hi, everyone.
Our our guest today is sort of a raid boss of both novel and standard rule sets. He brings sort of a unique perspective to his logic that's really difficult sometimes, but really rewarding to unravel. He's recently started a
I hope.
Patreon. Sorry?
I said I hope that it's rewarding to unravel.
I hope. He's recently started a Patreon page where he's publishing, I think, every 2 weeks puzzles or something like
Mhm.
that. And he's been working on a Sudoku book for the past few months. He's racked up 9 CTC features and uh, has appeared, I think, 25 times or more on ZetaMath stream. I think it was more because you recently as well,
Yeah.
since I wrote this, and has published 55 puzzles on LMD with over 200 puzzles submitted to the Discord testing submissions. This man is sort of a machine of dispensing fiendishly brilliant puzzles. Welcome, Grackles, and we're good. We're glad to have you today. Please
Hi,
welcome
everyone.
him. All right. So I usually start with this question, so we'll just start with what was the first puzzle you ever set?
The first puzzle I ever set was my very first Prime Sweeper. So I got into setting because I had never really heard of variant Sudoku until I started watching CTC with the Miracle Sudoku, just like so many other people. And I watched a couple more of those videos because I like puzzles and it had never really occurred to me that you could change things up. Um, and so then I thought about setting something because it sounded like fun. And the first thing I came up with was a Prime Sweeper. This was long before I posted anything to LMD. It was Prime Sweeper and with a different rule set than I use right now, and a um, and anti-night, and then a couple of little killer clues to disambiguate, and it was pretty tough,
Hmm.
but had some interesting logic. I actually for the anniversary pack that a whole bunch of people contributed to, I redid my I made another puzzle using the same rule set, but except updated to the newer version of Prime Sweeper because it works a lot better. Um, and yeah, I got some feedback on that, but I really liked doing that, and I thought that the rule set was pretty cool. So I then started setting lots and lots of other Prime Sweepers.
What was the difference in the rule set between now and then?
Um, so the first one had I assigned every I notated the number of the prime count for every cell,
Cell? Yeah.
kind of a la a corner mark. This was uh before we could do cosmetic text and
Right.
like invisible cages and stuff like that. So I just put in a corner mark in every cell, which was the prime count. And then so you couldn't really effectively use corner marks when solving the puzzle.
Hmm.
Um, but uh, but yeah, so uh, for the second prime sweeper puzzle I ever set, I had the idea of, hey, you know what? I could actually make the digits themselves be the prime sweeper clues, and that was the beginning of the negative constraint.
Right.
Was puzzle two. So yeah, it was a weird puzzle. I had no idea what I was
Right. Did you fit that in the same way that people normally set now, or did you do sort of
I
the
think
inverse thing? I know a lot of people did sort of
I think I did.
solution.
I think that I did. Well, I couldn't have just started from a grid because
Yeah.
I needed little killer clues at the end.
Hmm.
Um, but I think I don't remember exactly. It was
Right.
2 years ago
Yeah.
almost. Um, and I've set a couple of puzzles since then.
Maybe two or three. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I'm not, I don't really remember. I think probably I had a few ideas for how to do things and then kind of made sure that I had a solved grid and then went from there.
Right.
Like, break into solved grid without paying any attention to how you get from one to the other until afterwards.
Right. Yeah. You just happen you happen to like it, so then you kept it. Right.
Right.
Uh, did anything inspire that puzzle, or is it completely sort of from your brain onto the paper?
I watched the Miracle Sudoku video with my then 10-year-old.
Hmm.
And he and I were talking about what fun rule sets might be. And um, at that point, I'd watched a few of the videos, but I don't think I'd ever seen any kind of sweeper or count clue. Um, and so it just kind of like I wanted to do something with primes
Hmm.
because it seemed a little more interesting and unusual than the kind of even odd or high low splits that you often see.
Right.
Um, and
It's like an
so,
asymmetric split as well, like and a bit more asymmetric than even odd.
right. So, so it just seemed like it could be cool. And then I think something like, I've set something like 18 prime sweeper puzzles now.
18 to
Um,
25, somewhere in there.
yeah, somewhere in there.
So
The one that
did
took
it,
me the longest to set was actually the thermo
yeah.
prime sweeper because the negative constraint was killing me. I ended up that was before I started using the clued cells with no digits in them. Um,
Hmm.
I kept getting so at that point all of the givens were the prime sweeper clues,
Right, right.
and I kept landing them onto the thermos, which I didn't want to do, and it broke like 100 times, and then finally I had a really easy puzzle, and I said I'm done setting this. I'm gonna just go with this. I was tired of it.
Right. Uh, so it wasn't very long since you first started watching CTC that you set your own puzzle. It's just a
Yeah,
couple
it was a
weeks or something.
couple of months, I think.
Okay.
I think I saw the Miracle Sudoku in like August, and then I started um trying to set a puzzle at the end of October and
Hmm.
posted my first one in November, early November.
Right. Um, so you first started watching CTC when the Miracle Sudoku, that's Genesis.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yep,
Um,
just like so many people.
had you ever solved like Sudoku or variant Sudoku before watching CTC?
I'd solved a few classics. Um, I didn't know that they were called classic. They were just Sudoku at that
Yeah,
point.
right.
Um, but I yeah, I didn't understand like when I first watched the Miracle Sudoku, I didn't understand what he was talking about. I was like, what are these are not the rules of Sudoku. And then I did a little bit of research afterwards and said, "Oh, that's what that means." You know, the second
Right.
video that I ever saw, I think, was something that had thermometers in it. And I was like, I don't know what any of this means. So I think that might have been before they kept showing the rules on the screen. And I think I wasn't paying attention and missed him talking about it. So I just completely lost for the video.
Mhm.
um, but uh, but yeah, it was pretty soon after that because I was like, oh, these, I never really liked the classic very much. For whatever reason, my brain doesn't work well when I have to think about just pure digits. I need to be thinking about the relationships between them, which is
Right.
why I always set variants and almost never set classics. But once I discovered that I could do that, that was a thing that people did, I ran with it.
So were you mostly like watching CTC before you started making your own puzzles, or did you try to solve any of the puzzles on CTC, or try to look for other
No,
puzzles
no, no, no. I
you
didn't
didn't
start
solve?
solving the CPC puzzles um, until they started solving ones that I'd tested. And I was like,
Mhm.
oh, you know what? I'm probably actually a good enough solver now to solve some of these.
Right.
But it took me a while.
So were you
I was
testing other
struggling to solve
puzzles or looking for other puzzles outside of the CTC features?
a little bit,
Yeah.
but not until I got on the Discord, really.
Right.
So yeah, I think I had seen I think I'd seen a couple of puzzles in, like, there was like an odd even puzzle in a newspaper or something like that. I said, "Oh, hey, there are those that variant rule." But yeah, not really. It was mostly just CTC.
Right. Uh, so how long did it take between first starting setting and getting a CTC feature?
It took a long, it took, I think, several months. My first CTC feature was Shamrocks, which I did not set for St. Patrick's Day. I set it as something that was supposed to be a slightly easier version of Vineyard. Vineyard was the first good puzzle that I ever set. Um,
Mhm.
Everything before that was kind of, it was okay, but Shamrocks was supposed to be easier, and then I think Mark was looking for something to solve on St. Patrick's Day. Looking through the Discord and happened upon that one, and that was my first feature.
Right. So the rules for shamrocks were they were thermometers and disjoint. I see.
Yep. Yeah, just like for Vineyard, except that all of the thermometers were length two, sorry, length three instead of length two.
Right. So you sort of have I guess a love for thermometers of varying lengths, I guess.
I do. I like to explore the boundaries of what's possible, and Vineyard was my attempt to set a maximal puzzle instead of a minimal puzzle, as many
Mm,
clues as possible, um, while still being an interesting solve.
right.
And yeah, I heard a lot of people say that they'd never solved anything like this before. And it was, you know, the first in a number of puzzles that I've solved or that I've set, where you want to solve it by basically placing all of one digit and then moving on to the next digit and then on to the next digit in some order.
Hmm.
Um, I think the most maximal puzzle I ever set was I tried to do the same thing with arrows, not disjoint, just
Oh boy.
arrows.
Yeah.
And it's called Needles and Haystacks. Turganis gave me the title for that. Um, and yeah, and so that one ended up that one's in the archive. I never
Right.
posted it to the to LMD, but that one was my maximal arrows. I tried to have two cell arrows everywhere, every single cell, which I didn't quite manage, but close to it.
Two cell arrows everywhere. Interesting. I've seen a few people try to do something similar in testing, and I usually just scroll past them. because they look very busy.
Right. I can yeah, I can send you if you if you want to look, I can send you a link to the needles and haystacks.
Sure.
Here we go. It's 1853 in
Oh,
the
I
archive.
can't.
Here.
I won't be able to do that. It's fine. We don't need to bring it up.
Okay.
Oh, not. Okay. Thank you, Navarro. Um, okay. I need to know this before we continue.
Sure.
How do you pronounce Grackles?
Um, real quick, tall cat. I cannot find the dragon. I think my kids hid it somewhere. I'm sorry about that.
There was a dog at some point before, so you can
Yes,
look back. Yeah.
yes, there was a dog. I can show you. I can show you the dog, but oh, tall cat's lurking without sound, so he didn't hear me
Oh, okay.
say
Well,
that.
he's just gonna keep sitting there then.
Yeah. Um, so
He'll be the
I
disappointed
will.
dragon.
The answer is that I will never tell. Once
Okay.
the idea is like it's. I always say it's something that's pronounced differently in British and American English and other types of English. It's basically however you want to pronounce it is fine. I
So,
enjoy having people pronounce it differently.
so where did it come from? Where does the name Grackles come from?
It's got some resemblance to my initials, but
Hmm.
I don't know. It was actually the first place I used it was as my Reddit username.
Hmm.
Um, and then I just ran with it. It was just like, I don't know, I'm gonna type this.
Just keyboard mashing.
Kind of.
Put one of the letters of my name in there. Hit the keyboard a few times. Oh, that seems good. I don't even know how to
Yeah.
pronounce it. Um, all right. How would you describe your setting process?
It's a little bit different for every puzzle.
Hmm.
Um, I don't have a a single clear process. It also kind of depends on what constraints I'm working with. Sometimes if sometimes I'll start off with, if the constraints I'm starting with are very restricted when they work together, then I will often start with a break-in and then see how far, solve forward until I need to add another clue. If I don't, if they're not particularly restricted to start with, a lot of the times I'll do this thing, and I actually talk about this, or I mentioned this in my the setting video that I did for my first Patreon puzzle.
Right.
I'll do this thing that I call doodling, where I'll just open up F puzzles and draw lines or place dots or
Hmm.
place clues in some kind of pattern or symmetrically, and see if there are any restrictions that show up. And once I figure out what the restriction is and make sure I understand it, I'll delete everything else and then build a puzzle from that.
Right.
Um, so I other times, if it's something that's very kind of conceptual or cerebral, um, then I will need to do a lot of thinking about how I want to go about, making this work. And also, sometimes I'll do a bit of like scripting in Python to see if there
Right.
are edge cases that I can utilize. Like, for example, um, when I was doing the what was it? It was, I think, the skyscraper and sandwich count puzzle.
Okay.
Um, I I discovered that there were certain clues that would be very restricted, and so I would kind of look for what what kinds of restrictions I could put together and make work against each other, essentially.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think the most typical setting process right now is place some clues, solve forward, place some clues, solve forward, until I get to the end. But that's a really, really bare bones description.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's okay. You'll have lots of opportunities for more specific questions. So you mentioned your Patreon solve, or not a solve video, but a setting video for one of the puzzles on your Patreon. Why don't you plug your Patreon? Like, why should we all sign up?
Yeah, so I have a Patreon, Sudoku Supervillain, which is a
App name.
yeah, it's also a reference to the title of the book that I'm currently writing, which the full title of the book is going to be Malum Librum Sudokum, which is bad Latin for the evil book of Sudoku. And the subtitle is An Unauthorized Guide to Being a Sudoku Supervillain. The conceit is that it's written from the perspective of a journalist who basically infiltrates the organization run by the Sudoku supervillain, where he sets all his evil puzzles, and is now doing an expose to reveal that to the world. So,
based on a true story, of course.
And it's going to have over 200 puzzles, because that's how many I have set right now, and I know that I'm going to need to set a few more. So yeah, I'm hoping, like, at this point I have most of the puzzles made, but I need to finish writing the words, because I decided to have a narrative framework, like an idiot. So yeah, once I finish writing the words and get some editing in there, I'm currently planning to self-publish that. But in the meantime, I'm going to be releasing a puzzle every 2 weeks, and for each of those, there's 3 different tiers on the Patreon. Actually, there's 4, but the main content tiers are that the lowest one you get a puzzle. Next one up, there will be a solve video for each puzzle. And then the highest of those tiers is that I'm putting out a setting video where I talk through my thought process for each puzzle that I'm releasing.
Right. So, speaking of Navario's comment that you can set faster than he solves, do you get Navario to test all your puzzles, or is there like a bench of setters?
Navarro has tested a fair number of them, but the Andrew's Archis has tested every single book puzzle.
Wow.
And so he can speak to their quality. I asked him if there were any in particular on the list, because I was planning on curating it, that I should definitely include, and any that I should remove. And he said, include all of them, please. So I think hopefully that's a good sign.
Yeah, hopefully. That's a pretty crazy project to do 200 puzzles, and it's also quite a commitment to do a puzzle every 2 weeks for Patreons, with a setting video and a solve video, all very like a lot of work for you. So let's talk about projects. Like, how have you? I mean,
I don't really. It's not really work.
Is it?
To set puzzles? I just my brain thinks of them as when I'm just. I've set several puzzles in the shower, or at least had come up with several break-ins or concepts in the shower. This is what my brain does. It produces puzzles to solve, for it to solve. Because I love problem solving and finding the bits of logic. I love solving. I think I'm a better setter than solver. I think that's true for a lot of setters, because it's really easy to go when you know the logic that you intend. Finding the logic on your, it makes it, telegraphing is, I think, the most beautiful and difficult art to setting, and it's something that most people who start out as solvers instead of setters, in my opinion, tend to be a little bit better at it because they know what kinds of things they would spot.
Right.
Whereas I started out, I didn't really solve before I set. So I never really, developed the skill for telegraphing beforehand. And so it's something that I do struggle with. I know that a lot of the times, it would help also if I was more of a linear thinker, but I'm very, very lateral. Like I see things big picture all the time. So the way that
Right.
I approach something is here's, you make a deduction to narrow down some cells, and while most people might think, what's the next deduction I can make based on those cells? Whereas oftentimes my thought process is, what have I learned about the types of deductions in this puzzle, and where can I apply that elsewhere in similar situations? So
Right.
there tends to be a lot of jumping around the grid for my puzzles. I think the best example of this in a feature was Gate Key, which might be the best puzzle I've ever set. The Fortress Renban puzzle that blew Simon's mind, and that one, I did manage, because it's honestly relatively minimal. I managed to telegraph it pretty well, that where you should look first, and being able to use the logic in both places, like it's going, hey, think about what placing a Renban on a fortress cell does. And now you see I have that in a bunch of different places. So what does that mean?
Right.
So it's all about the implications. Niv, I did not say that my favorite puzzle is a fortress puzzle. I said the best puzzle that I've set is a fortress puzzle. I don't know if I have a favorite that I've set, but I think that Gate Key is the cleanest puzzle in terms of executing the idea that I had and not using a whole bunch of other clues, not muddying it up with extra ideas. It was just the one idea, and then it's presented clearly, and there's the puzzle, and it's done.
Right. Yeah, and it's not like a 2 minute idea. It's a 20-minute idea. Like,
right. You have to think your way through
yeah.
what it means, and then once you've done that, the puzzle unlocks itself.
The gate key, right?
Mm-hmm.
Good pun. So getting back to packs or projects, which I was originally going to ask about, but I love this discussion as well. So you've been involved with several sort of packs or projects throughout your career. What projects do you think have been the most rewarding for you or had the most impact on you?
Let's see. I
Quite
think,
a few.
yeah, I've been involved in quite a few packs. I have to say that Heatwave was the most rewarding for me, because it was just, first of all, it was an entire Patreon pack that I set myself.
Mm-hmm.
I had some testing, but I was the only one setting puzzles for it, and I was able to do a few things that I really, really liked in that pack, and was very glad that I was able to show, give the Patreon crowd, all of the CTC patrons, that to broaden their minds. Like, for example, Perspective, the first puzzle in that pack, is all of the 2-cell thermometers. And
Right.
personally, I think it's the most beautiful, like visually, puzzle that I've ever set, because the pattern is so clean and you know, and regular, and symmetrical, but
Hmm.
also I was able to teach a whole bunch of people who had never solved a puzzle like this that, hey, maybe you should start thinking about the digits in order. Which is a way that I solve things a lot of the times, even puzzles that aren't, it's not intended. I think about, hey, in terms of the global implications again, if I can only, if nines are restricted in this way, are there other places where nines are similarly restricted? And I think it's a very powerful technique, and it's something that a lot of people don't do. I also was
So
able
what do you
to,
mean by think about the digits in order? Because
like, for example, in perspective, and I know you don't have that puzzle here to show
no, I
because
can't
it's
show that puzzle.
yeah, because it's paid content for CTC, but you start off by, the puzzle itself is tons and tons of two cell thermos
Hmm.
where you have a lot more a lot of the tips overlap. You have a lot
Right.
more thermo tips than you do thermo bulbs, and so you have to start the puzzle by thinking, where can one actually go in this grid?
Hmm.
And it turns out it's very restrictive. And then once you do that, you say, well, you know what? Now that I can only put ones in certain bulbs here, where can I put twos? And
Yeah.
then so you can place all of the ones, twos, and threes and fours, and it's only at that point that it starts getting a little more complicated.
Right.
Um, so yeah, so thinking about them at the digits as a group, like
Hmm.
all of the ones or something like that, is a fun technique for me for solving and setting, and is isn't I don't think it's seen very much. A lot of people don't think that way. So, but yeah, I do think that Heatwave was the most rewarding, and then probably the Revelations pack. Oh, actually, the other two packs that were, I think, the most rewarding for me were Revelations and Breaking the Fourth Wall. Um, Breaking the Fourth Wall began my love affair with puzzles that where the constraints escape the grid,
Yeah.
and
I love those.
included some of my favorite puzzles that I've set. Um, and then Revelations was my Intergenesis foray into adversarial setting. We're gonna make these puzzles as hard as possible,
Is
and
that super?
we just
Is that sort of with the
and
supervillain vibe as well?
yeah,
Okay.
and there's some really really beautiful logic, especially the final puzzle that is the one that I posted on LMD is death, and that one I'm just the logic for that one was not intended to be, the logic itself wasn't going to be hard. It was supposed to be conceptually like having to look at all of these the possible the ambiguous clues, and then the variables in the clues was supposed to be very intimidating, but it turned out that the logic was actually just beautiful.
Hmm.
um so yeah, and I think another thing that I'm really known for in terms of, well, we may come back to that, but I saw someone mention earthquake, so we can talk about earthquake a little bit later. um
Sure. I mean, yeah, yeah. Go ahead. Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, I think that those three packs have been my
Hmm.
favorite. I try I mean, I'm really proud of everything that I end up putting in a pack. um and but I think those were some of the ones that I put the most, like, me setting a puzzle or two for a pack is, I set puzzles all the time, and I'm pretty fast.
Right.
um
So not much of
and
an impact on
so
you.
it's, what'd you say?
So it's not much of an impact on you, I was saying.
um yeah, I mean, it's it doesn't, like, Heatwave and Revelations and Fourth Wall, the puzzles that I put in those took over my brain for
Hmm.
however long I was setting them. So for other packs, I might set a puzzle and then go away and do set other things, stuff, and then come back. But I know Jovi can tell you that can attest to the fact that while I was setting jellyfish in the fourth wall pack, I would come, there were multiple days where I was complaining in VC1 about just how the fact that that puzzle was driving me insane, and I couldn't get it to resolve cleanly without breaking it, and I couldn't do anything else because it had taken over my head.
Right.
So that one, so the puzzles in those packs really took over. Like they occupied so much of my attention while I was setting them that they had a big impact on me.
Definitely. That definitely makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's get over to Earthquake because you mentioned it. So
Sure.
what is Earthquake? And
So
why is it impossible?
Earthquake. So I discovered that I was not the first person to set Prime Sweeper puzzles. There were a couple of them on LMD using slightly different rules, but that was and I came up with it independently of those. I didn't discover them until later. But Earthquake was my attempt to do something completely novel.
Right.
I set the first Earthquake puzzle for a prompt about natural disasters. So it was a monthly prompt, however many, more than a year ago. And I think a CTC video had involved skyscrapers, and I hadn't solved very many skyscrapers. It's become one of my most favorite rule sets to set with. But in the meantime, talking about those buildings and natural disasters, I immediately thought, well, what happened if the buildings fall down? And I had a few iterations of the rule set. In the first one, thinking of the skyscrapers as kind of playing a game of Mancala, where you drop a story in each cell. It started out looking much more like the clues would look much more like Japanese Sudoku clues, because it was showing how many, splitting each of the clues in the current rule set into individual like buckets, and showing how many of each, how many stories had fallen in each of the buckets. And so, one cool thing about that I had to get rid of later was that I was able to, I made one where one of the clues had fallen over. And so you had to reconstruct what the clues were supposed to be, because you could figure out where the stories from that building had fallen over. Right. But I ended up, I was trying to check my work in F puzzles to make sure I hadn't broken the grid, and I couldn't put those clues in there like that for the in F puzzles. I could only put in one number. So I condensed the clues, and then I was like, you know what, this is very clean, and it makes it seem more like a skyscraper puzzle, which is what I'm kind of starting from here.
Right.
And so, does it solve like this? And the answer was that it did. The first one and the second one were not good puzzles, because I didn't really understand, I didn't have an intuitive understanding of the rule set yet. I knew how it worked, I knew what the rules were, but I had no idea how to use the clues to actually make a good solve path. So I never. So it was only when
specifically.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
It was only for the third one where I sat down and I said, okay, now that I've have two puzzles under my belt here, I'm going to try to make a good one. And and so it was, what are that was my first one with a real break-in. And it was the first, it was the most, I still think it's one of the best, the easiest pure Earthquake that I've made. I've made a lot of them where that are easier because they use other constraints that you can use for the logic.
Yeah.
to help jumpstart the logic. But that one was the easiest pure earthquake for a long time until I made my the 6x6 intro at least.
Right.
Um, and so, but the way that the rule set started ended up looking or feeling like it was kind of like solving like a nonogram or picross puzzle that has been turned inside out.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense.
Um, and and it's I think that it is it is such an unusual rule set. Like a lot of rule sets can kind of be grouped together in how they work, or they have some similarities. Um, you know, solving a bunch of killer Sudoku will make solving other, make solving sandwich. Oh, sure. Yeah.
Please continue.
Yeah, solving a bunch of killer Sudoku will help you when solving sandwich
Right.
and um and X-sums and things like that
Hmm.
because it's similar logic. Skyscraper is unusual, and I think that's why it's not as popular because
It's similar
it's
to
first of
thermo in
all,
a way, but yeah.
yeah, and it's has some similarities to thermo, but it's also kind of hard for a lot of people to visualize.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely.
but earthquake is completely unlike anything else that you will solve.
Hmm.
I found that some of the people who like it the best are people who solve a lot of pencil puzzles because it almost feels more like a pencil puzzle than a Sudoku.
Yeah, that
The
kind of makes
Sudoku.
sense. Yeah. Inverted
I've thought
nonogram
about
sort of feel.
yeah, I've thought about how to turn it into a straight pencil puzzle, a pure pencil puzzle genre, but I don't really know how I would do that. I don't solve a lot of pencil puzzles, so it's tough for me to think about.
Hmm.
But yeah, it definitely has some elements there, and I'm really proud of most of the earthquake puzzles I've set because I find the multi-layered thought process required to solve one of these to be very beautiful. You really have to think about multiple like layers of abstraction, and that's why it's
Hmm.
so hard. Um,
Definitely.
it's also hard because you have to count, and counting is basically impossible. But um,
Yeah,
but
the
it's
pain of us all.
yeah, but also the abstraction.
So speaking of rule sets that are very difficult to wrap your head around, Andrew Sakas asked, "What is an example of a rule set that is too evil even for you?"
Um, there have been so let's see. Um, I have there are there's a couple of way from a couple of
You
ways
don't
for
want to
me to
give away
answer
your
this.
secrets, the trade
Um,
secrets.
one thing that I have one rule set that is somewhat popular that I have never set a puzzle with is Schrodinger cells. I've never set an S cell puzzle because I find them incredibly difficult to conceptualize. I probably could. I don't think it would be a very good puzzle because it just like uh, I find them very hard to solve as well.
Yeah,
It's just it's a rule set that doesn't fit the weird nooks and crannies of my brain very well.
right.
Um, Similarly, I have never set or solved a one of Zeta's new doubling cells puzzles because they're very similar.
I think
Um,
they're quite different, actually, in a way.
they're at least they seemed to me to be very similar when I set when I read the rule set. I thought to
They
myself,
are there are similar rule sets because they're inspired by each other. Doublers were
right.
inspired by SLs, but instead of like
Actually,
S
I just realized I
SLs,
have solved one.
yeah,
I
yeah.
solved one by the Kagito,
Oh,
and
yeah. Fours and
yeah,
sevens.
I did solve one of those. But yeah, I've been hesitant to try because it feels like it's going to hit my brain in a similar way. I don't actually know, but I don't it's not something that I feel really driven to try and set, because it just feels like I'm out of sync with it.
Right.
You know,
I think,
the way that my brain thinks about things just is different.
I think the reason why S cells are so hard is because you can never be sure of a deduction. Because, like,
Right.
you're like, well, I know this, but do I know that? Uh,
Right.
but with doublers, it can feel similar. I think Simon had a similar experience with doublers when he solved double double. In that, like, he was
Mhm.
like, well, this could be that, but actually, wait, no, if there's a doubler there, it would be fine. Uh, but in a way, I think they do lend themselves to more like, oh, well, this is impossible without a doubler sort of logic rather than the, well, this can't happen unless there's an SL instead of
Right.
the other way around where you're like, well, I need to put a doubler in here. I
Right.
need to use
I
a
have to
doubler.
say, having tested Ne, Ne plus Ultra, Ne plus
Hmm.
Ultra, if I'm, Frenching it up,
Yeah.
I actually appreciated that the arrows let me restrict where the shorter cells were, because it
Right.
was going to be really hard for me without something to indicate that. um, Also, I had said this earlier. Classics. I've set very few classics. I've set a few, but very few, because the not being able to, like, my brain runs almost entirely on, like, pattern and relationship recognition,
Hmm.
and um having not being able to, like, leverage any of that is very difficult for me to think about how to create logic.
Hmm.
Um, so it's really hard for me to hold in my head.
Right.
That's also a reason that I, like, maybe it would be easier if I tried to set a classic using colors instead of numbers. That's another thing. I know people get a kick out of the way that I solve puzzles. um,
Yes.
and it's because when I'm scanning, um, oftentimes I, like, it's a lot easier for me to look at a cell and say, or, to look at a box and say, oh, I only have green in these, in these cells, as opposed to the digits or even corner marks. I find corner marks very distracting. But like, good lifting colors is, I do that in most puzzles that I solve, because it's I use them in place of pencil marks. I oftentimes will use pencil marks only to indicate what has been ruled out of a cell. So, for example, I'll just put in all of the digits as center marks, and then delete ones to help notate another layer of what can't go in the cell. Um, uh,
Interesting.
and then I'll use colors the way that most people would use center marks,
Right.
because it's just, it doesn't, it works for my visual brain much better than digits.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't, I still don't even after that explanation, I still don't understand how you how you do that. To give a little bit of context, Grackles will like he'll figure out that you should probably color like two cells within a box, but then he'll assign every other color to every other cell in the box, and then go from there. That's sort of
Hmm.
generally what happens.
I,
Uh,
I often think geometrically about things as well, and that's another thing I managed to do to include in the heat wave pack.
mhm,
Once you got to the longer thermos, I was able to do some fun stuff with geometry and roping,
right.
um, especially the 7 cell thermos puzzle. I was able to have people think about, where do the end of the where does the ends of these thermos go in these other boxes? What are the, and so I like thinking geometrically. It's probably why I've solved almost every puzzle that Triganis has set.
Right. Uh, so before we get away from Turganis, I'll ask, like, what's your setting relationship with Turganis? Because,
I mean, he's one of my closest friends on the Discord, and he and I. have like our solving and setting styles, I think, complement each other well.
Mhm.
So he solves most things that I set, and I solve most sets, and we collaborate well. um, so yeah, and I've definitely been inspired by him somewhat, especially the way that like his dimension puzzles. I like layering. You know, that's a way of explicitly making layers of abstraction.
Right.
um, but yeah, so I really enjoy the puzzles. That's there's always something interesting going on, even for the easier ones.
Yeah. He's a pretty good
And
setter.
irregulars lend themselves very well to
Coloring.
excessive color.
Yes. Excessive. Yes. Indeed. So, as a setter, what sort of value do you think you've gotten from your collaborative setting experiences?
Besides having some really beautiful puzzles, the process of, you know, a lot of my collaborations thus far have been, not all of them, but a lot of them have been in the format of basically placing a clue or two and then passing it off to the other person, my
Yeah.
collaborator, and then having them place, figure out what happened from those clues and then having them pass it back to me.
Hmm.
And um, it's really interesting for me to see because I know that my mind often works in very different ways than a lot of than a lot of other people in the world. And so like the way that I approach logic, I'll place a clue because I'll think about it affecting the grid in a certain way. And it's very obvious from the way that from the next clue that's placed that my collaborator thinks about it in an entirely different way. And
Right.
so um, it it also adds something, a lot of depth to the solve forward and place a clue,
Hmm.
because after you place a clue, the solving forward that you're going to do is not where you started from, not where you ended from. There's going to be more to the grid
Right.
than there was before, and there's going to be more clues to incorporate. And so I think we ended up with some really really beautiful puzzles. Obviously, my favorite of those was my collaboration with my 12-year-old son, which ended
Yeah.
up on the channel.
That was good.
um, yeah,
We did that on this
that
channel
puzzle was
too.
something special. It just he and I were sat on the couch and together. I said, "Hey, you want to set a puzzle with me? I've been doing." Yeah. And so um, I said, hey, why don't, or he suggested 159, and I said, hey, let's do quadruples because um, this way there's no math involved. I mean, he
Yeah.
loves math more than any other person in the world, but we it was like these were two constraints that were not mathy, and so that they would interact with each other in interesting ways.
Right.
And he and I took turns placing quadruples, and then we would solve forward and the uh, the the two 4-digit quads that touch box 5. I placed the 5 6 7 8, and he placed the 2 3 5 6, one after the other. Um, After having placed a couple more couple clues before that, but we did
Hmm.
that, and then as we were solving that forward, we said, "Oh wow, this is really special. There's something really going on here that's cool." And after we placed those, it didn't take very much else to make the puzzle, solve.
Right.
And so I'm really really proud of that one. Not only because my son set half of it,
Yeah.
um, but yeah, a lot of the collaborations have cool things going on. Um, so yeah, I think that the um, riff, I remember that too.
What is
My
that?
not that was my 9-year-old who was reading Mysterious Benedict Society, and
Oh.
one of the characters there is named George Washington, and so they were asking me. I had accidentally unmuted myself.
That's funny. Um, Speaking of collaborations and Turgenis together combined, he asked a question. He said, I know you've made a lot of successful collabs with many different setters. Do you find that you have to actively adapt your style to the other setter? I know you sort of do the clue placement thing. Is that
Mhm.
you adapting your style or
Not really. I think I think really the best the only thing that I've had to adapt is how to how to interact. The important thing has been to say, um, you know, there's no time limit on this. Do whatever you want.
right?
Don't don't feel bound to what I've already placed, and just see where the logic takes you. And that's been really successful so far because the people that I've collaborated with are all great setters, and I feel like we've done a good job of melding our different styles because we kind of have to. The putting it together piece by piece, it forces you to kind of react and interact with the way that your collaborator thinks about it, and thinks about puzzles in general.
Hmm.
So it's been a really rewarding experience overall.
Definitely. Is there anyone who you always feel like, oh, I should make a collab with them, but you haven't yet? Like, is there someone you really would like to make a collab with, even if you
Um,
don't have
I
communication with them or
started
something?
I started Zetameth and I started a collaboration, and I've had that puzzle for a few weeks. I got very distracted by real life,
Hmm.
um,
You
and
added doublers to
also
it.
no,
You're like,
it was
how do I remove these?
I don't I actually at this point don't remember even what we were doing with it. I will get back to it. I intend to finish it, but I also feel like I didn't fully understand how we got to where we got when we stopped. And then so I'm actually glad that I've taken some time because I'll want to solve it again from the beginning
Mhm.
and make sure that I actually understand what we're doing. But I mean, I honestly I would be happy to do a collaboration with basically anybody. I, you know, I've I reached out to a bunch of people that I talk to a lot
Mhm.
to do my first round of collaborations, but I'm game for pretty much anything. So I think that if you name someone on the Discord, I think the answer is yes. I want to collab with them.
That's nice. That's wholesome. Um, how long does it usually take you to set a puzzle by yourself? Two
It
minutes.
depends. Um, Usually with including the test solve, it depends on how complicated it is. But usually the minimum is about an hour. Uh, I don't know that I've ever set a puzzle, including test solve, faster than an hour that I've been. I have
Really,
done it,
really happy with?
but um,
You cut out for like
except
half a second. Did you say really happy with? Is that
yeah,
okay?
except for there are some book puzzles that I set faster because I was deliberately trying to make them easier.
Hmm.
um, and the test solve process went very quickly at that point.
Right.
So yeah, there have been some easier puzzles that I've set for the book that took me less time, but usually the minimum is about an hour. The maximum that a puzzle has taken me to set from conception to completion was 6 months, and that was mod sandwiches, which
Yes.
is still one of my favorite puzzles that I've set, partly because the rule set is so scary, but the solve is not scary at all and is really satisfying. And part of the reason that it took me that it is so satisfying is because um, the great majority of the time that I spent on this was conceptual. I had the
Right.
idea that I wanted to make a puzzle with modular sandwich clues, and uh, I did a lot of work thinking about, like, there were a number of difficulties, you know, how do I deal with this problem that I'm going to run into when setting, or that the solver would run into while solving. And it took me a really long time to come up with a rule set that I was happy with.
Hmm.
That would, um, and then once I actually started, I started placing clues and ended up seeing, trying to figure out what I could deduce from the rule set, and ended up needing to tweak the rule set a little bit.
Right.
The rule about
Including cross.
where each sum has to be unique
Oh yeah, that
was,
one as well.
yeah, that one I used a lot while setting, and it wasn't until I came up with that rule and discovered that I could use it to force some some sandwich sum values, that that I was able to actually set the puzzle from start to finish.
Right.
I started trying to set this many times, and every time ran into a brick wall because it wasn't solvable. There was nothing that I could deduce from, until I had placed so many clues that it was like bifurcation city.
Right.
So it took a lot of conceptual work on this one. But most puzzles don't take me that long.
I actually do remember talking to you about you trying to create this because I asked you if you want to do a collaboration, and you said, "Oh
Right.
yeah, I've had this idea that I'm trying to get done, mod sandwiches," and we talked about it for a little while, and then I was like, "You've thought about this far more than I could even in a month, so uh, maybe not
Right.
that."
Yeah,
uh,
that one was interesting. Um and yeah, so that was by far the longest set. The
mhm,
the puzzle that took me the longest from placing the first clue to the end has to be, yeah, because once I figured out mod sandwiches, once I figured out the rule set that I like, actually setting that puzzle took me a few days.
right,
um because I now understood the rule set thoroughly enough that I could place clues and know what they were going to do.
right,
um but the puzzle that took me the longest from the first thing that I put down in that ended up in the final puzzle to the end has to be, um, Tic Tac Tournament. That one took me, I think, about a week, maybe a little bit more, because there were that one is not posted
okay,
to LMD because I'm not convinced that it would be particularly fun or interesting for
okay,
a lot of the solvers.
yeah,
Um, but Navarro, a few days compared to the total 6 months that it took it was not very much. um, so yeah, a few days is a long time for me as a setter in general, but a few days at the end of 6 months of conceptual is not very much. But yeah, Tic Tac Tournament took a couple, like maybe 10 days in total once I started making the puzzle, because I had to write a bunch of stuff, and then I rewrote it, and then I rewrote it again to make it solvable, and I posted, I think, 3 or 4 versions into testing, because I was getting feedback on how you know how much how difficult it was to parse the clues. That one
right.
is the other craziest rule set ever. um, because the rule set is a newspaper article.
Speaking of crazy rule sets, Rock Red
Yeah.
Zero did ask, what are your top three? Please don't ever use this rule set. It almost killed me constraints. I'm guessing these are from you.
um, well, ones that like in terms of setting, I would suggest that no one try to set a puzzle with negative arrows, at least until I've tried it again, and seen if it's actually something that can be done
Like
without
shards?
driving both you and the setter and the solvers insane.
Like
And yes,
shards?
that's
Okay.
shown.
Yeah, that yeah.
um, the the puzzle that broke the most was jellyfish.
Mhm.
It was the most fragile. Uh, I think I like most rule sets. So, and I'm usually pretty proud of the ones that I've come up with. Oh, actually, there's another one that recommend not trying, which is one of the one of the hardest puzzles I've ever set. Got zero, or got very few solves in the Discord archive because uh, I think partly people were really scared of it.
Yeah.
I know, I think the only person who's rated it is Prime Weasel, and I know that he took about a week to solve it,
Oh
and it's
no.
called Just a Bit of Logic. And it's because it involves bit logic operations,
Ah, okay.
and it is truly evil. Don't solve it unless you are a masochist, and don't try to set because it was really really hard to not break it. Niverio, I showed you this puzzle once, and and it was months ago, and then you said, "No, I'm not solving that."
Okay, moving over to other constraints that you're proud of, Kodak asked, can you give a top three of constraints you've invented that you'd like to see more puzzles with?
Well, Earthquake, obviously.
Obviously.
Um, I love Earthquake, and I want people to set them and solve them because it's such an unusual rule set.
Hmm.
And if you can solve enough Earthquake puzzles that you start to, or set enough that you start to understand how they work, I think that it'll be really rewarding to both set and solve. There's one I set a while ago now that was, I think, one of the first, probably the first earthquake that Joe Avron solved, and it was Earthquake in Renban, and I'm really really proud of the logic that it's in that one. It's just so beautiful and clean, and very few people have solved it because people are terrified of Earthquake. Um,
Hmm.
but I get it. Um, it's you have to be a very visual person in my opinion because you have to be able to see the buildings falling over and figure out the directions and all that stuff. But yeah,
Like,
Earthquake definitely.
skyscraper is
Um,
already hard to visualize, so then you're adding another layer of visualization on top of it.
well, the skyscraper, I mean, the normal skyscraper rule set is very different from Earthquake.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, it's the Mancala bit that's tough to visualize. Um, but it's it's such a cool rule set. I'm really proud of that. I'm also, I mean, I don't know if we can count Tic Tac Tournament as a rule set, but I'm really really proud because it took so much work to write, but and it's also just such a cool idea. I've had a sequel to that to Tic Tac Tournament rolling around in my head for quite a long time, and eventually I will set it. So there will be another one for the people who solved Tic Tac Tournament and enjoyed it, which I think is actually not that long of a list. People who've solved it, but I think that most of the people who've solved it have enjoyed it. Um, and then, I mean, I really like Prime Sweeper. I don't know if it counts. I don't know if we can say that I've invented it. I definitely popularized it. If it, I mean, a couple of other people have set prime sweeper puzzles. um, but yeah, I don't know if there's, I don't know if that counts as me inventing a rule set.
Well,
I'm not sure.
if that's just something you'd like to see more of, that's also an answer to the question.
I mean, it's a really cool rule set. I think there have been a fair number of sweeper puzzles
Yeah.
now. So yes, Xeno has set multiple prime sweeper puzzles.
Definitely.
It's a really cool rule set. The other one that I really like is just a tweak. I really like tweaks on existing rule sets.
Hmm.
For example, I've done a bunch of different tweaks of killers. So obviously, there's pieces of the puzzle which had some negative numbers and was the precursor to shards. There
Yeah.
was progress, which got featured on the channel, which is another puzzle I'm really proud of this path on because I designed it very carefully. Um, and there was another one. I think the first one I ever did of this was called the loneliest number, which was that none of the killer cages could have a 1 because 1 is the loneliest number, and 2 is the loneliest number since the number 1. And so only one of the cages could have a 2 in it. And that one was pretty cool. But yeah, I like doing variations on killers a lot, and I guess other things too, where you just like tweak something and it completely changes the logic that you can do.
Right. That's
Those are
definitely
also some of my favorite puzzles to solve. Two of my favorite puzzles of all time, or three of my favorite puzzles of all time, are killers with with tweaked rule sets. And I can tell you which ones those are. I'm happy to advertise other people's puzzles because they are all three of those are just some of the best puzzles I've ever seen. I think all three of them were featured on the channel as well. There was the unique sums, I think it was by who was that by? Well, there was the unique sums killer by Jovi. That was by Jovial. That was one of my favorites of all time. There was maybe it was Mesmer. That one where the whole grid was covered with cages and each one had to have a unique sum. That one was unbelievable. I caught that one in testing and was trying to convince everybody to solve it, and then like a year later it showed up on the channel. And blew Simon's mind. And then the other one was Cage Scrapers by Glum Hippo, which is just an unbelievable puzzle. Mm-hmm. And combines Killer and Skyscraper.
your favorites.
Yeah.
So speaking of advertising other people's puzzles and specific setters, do you have a specific setter that you normally sort of solve from when you're looking for inspiration?
I take inspiration from a lot of different people. I know that I think in particular ways that some setters have of dealing with individual constraints are inspiring to me. So for example, Codec and I share a love of between lines, and I feel like, and I think every between line puzzle that I've solved of Codex has been brilliant, as you would expect. And I have found myself making use of a lot of similar, or like, being inspired by the way that he works with between lines when I set between line puzzles. Turganus with irregulars and killer, just geometry related stuff. I have found myself inspired by Zeta Math, especially when it comes to parity. The way that he works with Renban lines. I think one of the most formative things, I should say there are two things two memories that I have that stick out as particularly formative for me as a setter. One of them was Clover's setting video, because it changed how I thought about solve paths. it was the first time that I really realized that the way that I thought about, the way that I built deductions on other deductions was different than the way that a lot of other people do.
Right.
And has changed how I think about the solver's experience of solving my puzzles. Which is why when I set something like shards, I apologize because I know it's going to be painful. Whereas in the past, I would not have necessarily done that because it wouldn't occur to me that it would be painful. And then the other thing, which actually happened well before that, was solving Sam Kappelman-Lynes's pack of 27 linked puzzles, which is just an unbelievable accomplishment and one of the most amazing Sudoku things that I have ever seen. The way that it was constructed, where none of the puzzles were solvable until you could solve all of them. It's like a tour de force of setting skill. And first of all, it introduced me to a lot of different constraints. Sam is an amazing setter in general, and so all of the puzzles are great. But also the idea of a meta puzzle was not something I'd encountered before, and that it was an incredible experience to solve all of those. So yeah, I think that those two things in particular have been very formative for me.
Right. Speaking of setter videos or whatever, what's sort of a piece of advice that you received early on in your setting that helped you improve as a setter? Is it the Clover, that thing that you just mentioned?
Well, I was pretty established as a setter before I saw the Clover video.
Yeah.
I think really the thing that made a big difference for me was when I started solving a lot more.
Yeah.
Like, I know the turning point for that. So I described Vineyard as the first good puzzle I ever set. And that was also the first puzzle of mine that I ever saw live streamed.
Right.
Kodak pinged me. It was my first time in VC1. Kodak pinged me that he was going to solve Vineyard.
Yeah.
And I watched him solve it, and that experience kind of went, oh, whoa, that was weird. Like, he definitely had deductions that I didn't have, and
Classic Kodak.
Yeah. And he thought about things in a different way, but also seeing a puzzle that I created go from unsolved to solved before my eyes was kind of humbling. I guess my puzzles now get streamed a lot in VC1, often because I bother people until they solve them. So I'm used to it now, but it's still kind of like, if I take a step away, it's still kind of humbling to watch that happen. And it kind of made me have more reverence for the finished product. Like, someone who's in theater, I did a lot of theater in high school, and there's something to be said for when you know what's going on behind the scenes. It's hard to maintain the magic that you feel when you see it from the outside. And I feel like it's kind of similar. It at least before then, it had kind of been similar for me. Puzzles, like I knew all of the logic that I had put into it, and I knew all of the struggles and trials and tribulations I'd had while setting it. But watching somebody experience it in real time kind of put me back in the audience, and I was able to appreciate a lot more what it was that we do and how cool and beautiful it can be.
Definitely. Is
Um,
Yeah, is that a piece
I
of
was just going to say
advice?
there are a couple of questions that I saw in chat.
Yeah, go ahead.
Zeno had asked, did I add the ratio dots to progress near the end of my setting process, or I want to use them early on? I added them right at the end. I got to a deadly pattern and said, ugh, this is really frustrating. I can't add any more cages. And then I put in the dots and discovered actually that the dot in box 7 had really cool logic associated with it. And then said, okay, I'm good. I love these now.
Right.
And then Rift Clown asked what my solve time was for Strange Loop. I think it was a couple of hours, and I needed a lot of help. I'm a stronger setter than I was at that point. I mean, a stronger solver than I was at that point. But I still think it would take me quite a while if I was, if I was, if I was gonna, if I hadn't solved it before and was trying to solve it now with the skills that I have. I think it would still take me a while.
Yeah, definitely. Um, is there any piece of advice that you see often, like given to newer setters, or that you had seen in the past given to newer setters that you disagree with, that you would say that's don't listen to that?
um, I think that honestly, a lot of people, well, I don't know that I would say that I disagree with advice, partly because no piece of advice is going to work for every solver anyway, or every
Yeah.
setter anyway, or every person. You know, different people are going to find different things valuable. But one thing that I don't think that, like, that I think we probably should say to new setters is write down all your ideas, but before you actually try to start setting, go solve a whole bunch of puzzles that use the same constraints. Solve the best rated ones, the ones that people recommend to you, because if you do that, then you will have the context that you'll come into setting with will be more welcoming and rewarding for solvers than if you do what I did and start setting first, because you'll have a sense of what gives a puzzle a good flow, a better sense of how to telegraph things. I feel like you won't necessarily learn how to use your idea better, but you will learn the other things, the other skills that aren't related to how to work with a particular constraint. You'll learn the general setting from, because you have to think about the solver. We make
Hmm.
these puzzles to be solved.
Right.
Some people make them just as a logical exercise, and that's fine. And I've done that too. Um, I posted one of those, and it was shards, and I'm sorry about
It's okay.
that. But the but like we generally we make these puzzles to be solved, and you need to have an understanding of what people are going to do when they solve your puzzle,
Hmm.
for it to be to give you a better handle on how to make that.
Right.
And it's totally fine if you want to jump in and start setting, but I feel like someone who solves a bunch before they actually start to set, or at least are solving concurrently with setting, will end up with better puzzles faster than
Right.
just learning as you go.
I think it's a good piece of advice to say, if you if you have an idea and you want to like do your idea, like do whatever, even if it's not a novel idea, you just want to set an arrow puzzle, then
Oops, sorry.
no worries. Then go solve some arrow puzzles first, so you get more context in the types of logic people use.
Hmm.
so people feel
Yeah,
more comfortable solving it.
right. Also, because you may discover that um, your the idea that you wanted to show off either doesn't work very well from a solving standpoint, or leads to unpleasant puzzles, or has been done to death. But
Hmm.
you also may be inspired and have more ideas. Um, I've had people ask me if it's okay if they set a puzzle with a similar rule set to one of mine, and it boggles my mind that someone would ever say no to that. Like, yeah, run with it. Inspiring other people is the biggest compliment that you can get as a setter.
Hmm.
Inspiring other people to set similar puzzles.
Right. Definitely. Um, so speaking of that sort of, I guess, our initial sort of wonder or ideas that come with starting setting, Canty asked for someone that is set as much as you have. Does the initial sort of wonder that came with setting still exist for you? And if it's there, has it somehow changed over time?
I think that really what's happened, like, I don't think that, there are a lot more puzzles being set than there were 2 years ago.
Hmm.
And um, so it could, but I don't think that we've even come close to scratching the surface of all the logic and deductions and beautiful puzzles that are out there. And um, and so I think really what's happened is that it has become easier for me to tell when I've set something that's special.
Right.
Um, I, you know, I've now set enough puzzles that that I kind of can tell. Like, I know which ones are kind of. I don't tend to post a puzzle that's bad anymore. I'll test puzzles that I'll post puzzles that are broken by accident because nobody's perfect. um, I'll post puzzles that are harder than I want them to
Hmm.
be. Um, because oftentimes because I've either not telegraphed it very well, um, or I've made an assumption, which I ended up forcing the deduction by the end of the puzzle, but it's not actually something that's restricted in the way I wanted to. I do that a lot.
Yeah, it's
um,
great when you're like, I just want to make sure that this is unique. Okay, it is
yeah,
unique. Good.
yeah,
I haven't messed it up then. And then
right,
you realize that you just accidentally didn't mess it up, but you did
right.
actually mess it up. You know, like,
Yes, yes, I've
it's the
done that a
worst.
lot. But I don't really post. I try not to post bad puzzles. Sometimes I'll save them for use later. But I like it's now. I think like when I made progress, I knew that I had something special.
Right.
When I made building blocks, I knew that I had something special. I knew that it was really hard, but I knew that it was something special. Um, and so I can tell the puzzles of my. It's become easier for me to tell which puzzles of mine are going to be good and which of them are going to be great.
Right.
But I do have a sense of sometimes it's a sense of wondering why the puzzle is ready and getting frustrated because now I don't know whether to place clues that force this or pretend that I don't know that it's unique and go from
Right.
there or whatever. But I definitely do have a sense of, ooh, this is cool, you know.
So do you have advice for newer setters who haven't developed that sense of when the puzzle is great? Like, how do you know when the puzzle is great? Is it hard to
When
tell? Is it just experience? Or it's okay.
oftentimes it'll start, well, let's see. Sometimes a sometimes a puzzle will be great because it ticks all the boxes of like just beauty and like simplicity and interesting logic. And that's progress. I don't think progress was groundbreaking. It was just uh, one of my favorite puzzles and one of my best puzzles in terms of executing an idea, just like Gate Key. Um, so that's one thing that can make a great puzzle. What made building blocks great, and Zag was the first great puzzle I ever made. I said that Vineyard was my first good puzzle. My first great puzzle was Zag, and oftentimes I'll know that I have something when it takes me a long time to understand what it is that I'm doing. And so for building blocks, I placed some clues and it was very restricted. And I said, what is going on here? And when I discovered, when I understood the logic, I said, okay, this is something fantastic. And this happened with Zag. I set this puzzle. I would have made a setting video of this if it had ever been featured, but I think it was too hard. And it's because the puzzle itself, when you're past the break-in for this, is probably a nice 3-star, but it's 5-star because the break-in is incredibly intricate. And when I set the break-in for this, I had no idea why it worked the way it did. And right. it took me a good I was setting Zag at the same time that Jovial was setting, and we were going back and forth, like passing puzzle back and forth, saying, oh my gosh, like, look at this thing that I figured out. And I remember saying to Jovi, I don't understand my own puzzle. I don't understand the logic here. I need to prove this to myself. And it took me a good 12 solid hours of thinking to figure out why the break-in worked the way that it did. And once I had that, I was like, okay, this puzzle is fantastic because it's just so crazy that it works this way. So that was Zag was before the advent of the ranks solver. It was I did use the F puzzle solver to make sure that my setup wasn't broken, and discovered that instead of being broken, it was actually way more restricted and powerful than I had any concept of. So yeah, this puzzle was, I feel like this puzzle was way ahead of its time in terms of my setting career. Right. It took me a long time to make another puzzle that was as like groundbreaking in terms of logic as this one was.
Definitely.
I remember that after trying to solve this puzzle on stream, Clover banged her head against it for about 3 hours, and it was I had posted it before I figured it out. So I wasn't able to explain it to her because I didn't understand it yet. I had kind of an idea, but I didn't actually understand it. And so she ended up giving up or bifurcating or something like that. And then took a while for her to start solving my puzzles again afterwards. And I felt really bad because I probably shouldn't have posted it before I before I understood it. And I've tried to not do that again.
Speaking of feeling bad and regrets of doing things, what's your biggest puzzling regret? Is there any puzzle you'd like to redo or take back, or any shards you'd like to pick up?
Yeah, I think that there's a puzzle that I'd like to if I could have not posted it in the archive, I would probably have been better. And that's this puzzle, The Ladder. It's a straight standard thermo puzzle, and it was a relatively early on in my setting learning how to be a setter,
Yeah.
where I made a puzzle that was way too grindy and hard for no reason because I didn't really, I ended up archiving it much later, having forgotten that it was so bad. It's not a good puzzle, and I shouldn't have posted it. I shouldn't have tried to archive it. I had just been going through and like looking at which of my puzzles from testing hadn't been archived yet. And I came across it and I was like, oh, this is like 3 or 4 months old. Let me see if I can get a second test solve on it, and then I'll archive it. And Glipperl thought it was fun,
Oh,
but
no.
that's Glipperl.
Yeah.
Um,
Glipperl, yeah.
yeah. So
Glipperl said it was
my
easy,
other,
so it's probably fine.
well, I don't think he didn't say it was easy. He said it was interesting,
Interesting.
but it's really not. It's so like you have to just like grind down candidates on thermos for way too long to be interesting. The other big issue that I had was when I posted a puzzle to LMD that was that I had missed that I made an assumption.
Oh, yeah.
No, none of my testers had told me beforehand how hard it was, and then someone had asked a question because they were struggling to solve it, and I said, let me go through here, and then I was solving it, and I got to the point where they were stuck, and I said, oh geez, I completely forgot about this case. So I ended up having to take the puzzle down and rework it, and I ended up with a really, really, really good puzzle, and I'm really proud of it. But I wish that I had realized the problem before I posted it anywhere.
Right.
And not had to redo it and take the puzzle down.
Yeah. To avoid those situations, I usually ask if I feel like I might have done something weird, I ask the testers like, what was the hardest step that you found? Because if it's something that I didn't think existed, it's probably because I messed up.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. But I feel like I've somewhat gotten better at catching those. I'll still do it a lot, but usually it's not quite so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, actually, I thought of another mistake.
Oh.
And that mistake was including the puzzle Desperado in the 7x7 puzzle pack that Turganis and I collaborated on. Because that was a puzzle that I had set I think 12 puzzles, of which the plan was for me to include 7 of them for the pack. And I had set that one kind of as a joke or a troll. And then we didn't release the pack till a month later, so I'd forgotten that it was a troll. And I should have gone back and resolved it because it's you have to use uniqueness. Yeah, in a very specific way to solve it, or it's incredibly hard. You can solve it without using that trick, and Playmaker did, and it took him a really long time. And it was really, really, really hard, and I felt really bad. I would not have hack if I'd remembered setting it as a troll. So. Yeah, that was something that I regretted. I had like 3 or 4 other puzzles that would have been totally fine to include. Yeah.
Definitely. Speaking of regrets and stuff like that, what do you think your reputation as a setter is to the public? And do you think that matches reality, or is it different?
Well, I think that on the alignment chart, generally people think I'm chaotic evil, and I get that because I do enjoy setting puzzles
To torture people?
that, well, I usually don't do, the torture isn't usually on purpose.
Yeah.
It was
At
on
least
purpose for
not
the
now.
revelations.
Not now.
Yeah.
Not anymore. He's a changed man.
Shards I made, again, I keep bringing this up. Shards was a thought experiment that turned into a puzzle that had a logical solve path.
Mhm.
And then I posted it because I just I couldn't think of a way to make it solvable in a pleasant way. And I thought that the break-in, like the initial logic was so cool that I didn't want to not post it. So I kind of just posted and said, sorry. But yeah, I think people I think I have a reputation for being evil. I think a fair amount of that is because of the different way that I think about puzzles, the solve process, and a lot
Right.
of people do. You know, I things deductions that make sense for me are often hard for other people to see because it has to do with global context rather
Mhm.
than local, local, sequence of deduction. And so it does make it hard. You know, you have to think about the puzzle as a whole, which is difficult for people who approach things in a more linear way. Um, Similarly, I have definitely run into walls and had to ask for a lot of help when solving because I often don't see the local results of the deductions that I make when I make them because I'm just generalizing.
Right.
Um, so I think that my puzzles have a fair reputation for generally being difficult. I find it pretty difficult to make easy puzzles because the way that I think about them, I remember I had tried to make a gas level thermo puzzle,
Hmm.
and it ended up being about a 2 out of 5 stars. And I had asked Clover what made it not a gas, and she said there are geometric deductions here that gas solvers would have no idea how to make, and they were so automatic for me that because of whatever puzzle construct I have in my brain, they're natural consequences of that rather than being a specific deduction that you have to look for. So I think it's fair, even though I often and it makes it. That's another thing I've gotten better at over the years, which is um, predicting difficulty.
Hmm.
Um, Unless I, make an assumption, and then I have no idea. But that's
It's
true of
easy
everybody.
when they're all the same. Five,
Right.
five, five.
I have not actually set that many 5 stars
Yeah.
compared to 4 and 3. I definitely have a collection of, but a lot of my stuff recently has been around the 3 star and 4 star level because I've gotten better at telegraphing with experience, and I've gotten better at recognizing what kinds of deductions a solver would want to make from where they were. Derek, I said that I will never say. um, yeah, so I also think that because the logic in my puzzles isn't necessarily stuff that would be intuitive to people to start with, that I also have a reputation for having these really brilliant, crazy deductions because people find them revelationary. I always feel a little bit bad when something that seemed obvious to me is a big revelation for people, and I'm glad that they enjoy that part of my puzzles. I'm really happy about it, and I like inspiring people like that. But I feel a little bit bad when it's something that just seemed obvious to me. Like that was supposed to be an easy deduction.
Oh, guys, that was the gimme. Come on.
Right. um yeah, Wisteria, I do try to do that as well. Sometimes I'll try to say Grkles.
Gosh. What what is the most Hercules-y puzzle that
Herculean.
Herculean puzzle you've ever made? Like what puzzle sort of encapsulates the essence of your setting style?
Hmm. I think that's hard to say because I have set so many different types of puzzles.
Yeah.
Derek, that's not true. Um, that's the way that I think about it when I'm talking to American people, and the way that I think about it when I'm talking to people with other accents and other languages is different. Because that's the way that most American people have said that they pronounce it in their heads.
That's not how he pronounces it. That's just how he is letting you perceive it.
Right. Right. It was a long con, basically.
Your entire
um,
Sudoku career has just been a long
yeah,
con
so
to make people confused about your name.
exactly. Yeah, the real puzzle was the usernames we made along the way.
Right.
Um,
Anyways, back to the question.
but yeah, so I I've set so many puzzles and so wildly many puzzles. Peter, um you've heard Simon and Mark puzzle pronounce it. Um, I yeah, I don't know that there is a single puzzle that really encapsulates me as a setter, unless you say something like Tic Tac Tournament, just so off the wall that it's
Mhm.
not like anything else. But I like to push the boundaries of what constraint of what logic is available for constraints. For example, with building blocks, I with that one set about as an attempt to make a puzzle, a German whispers puzzle, where typically with German whispers the restricted digits are 4, 5, and 6, and I wanted to make a puzzle that made you care about threes and sevens
Right.
instead, and that was not something that I had seen in a puzzle before, specifically focusing on those digits as the restricted ones. And then there, similar things like gate key as pushing the boundaries of what you can do with Fortress and Renban by way of their interaction. Um, I like I, I don't often make puzzles that are like I often make puzzles that just are slightly off kilter because I can single well I can't really say that anymore because I will say that I made a lot of single for the book and kind of rediscovered my love of each of them in the process.
Hmm.
Uh, I made 4 or 5 puzzles for each variant for all of the common variants, and it was a very rewarding experience as a setter to refamiliarize myself with how they work. Um, and I have noticed that since I did that, the way that I've noticed myself borrowing logic from some of those puzzles because it was cool and I'd kind of forgotten about it because I often do multiple constraint puzzles, and they using multiple constraints isn't it is not a linear amount of complexity that you're at. It's an exponential amount of complexity, or multiplicative.
Right.
Um,
It's not like
but I
additive.
like
Yeah.
yeah I like to I really like um, to find interesting ways that constraints interact. Um, and so I think that's honestly the puzzles that encapsulate me the most are the ones where the constraints interact in a way that you wouldn't expect.
Right. Um, Easy question. What environment do you prefer to set in? Quiet, loud, in your office? Could you do it in public? Like,
Um, I I think that
sauna
I mean
environment.
I've set puzzles wherever. Um, I think that honestly, the biggest thing is that because I have children and a family, and I've only been setting during, starting in the pandemic, and everybody's been home a lot,
Hmm.
um, that I often get interrupted while I'm setting and have to set
Yeah.
things down, come back to them. And I think oftentimes that makes it better for a couple of reasons. One is that I will often, if I hit a wall when I'm setting where I just don't really know what to do, or haven't like gotten my head around a piece of logic that I want to use, that a bit of break will like let my subconscious work on it.
Hmm.
Um, and then, um, but then also, uh, because of my ADHD, I will, if I have to go away for a while, I will often completely forget what I was doing,
Right.
which makes me refamiliarize myself with the puzzle. And I actually catch a lot of mistakes that way, and also notice a lot of new things that way. I get to come back with fresh eyes. So the
Right.
reason that my test solves take the majority of the time or for most of my puzzles, unless it's a puzzle that takes me multiple days to set. The reason that my test solve takes a long time is because I solve it from scratch, unless it's like my third iteration and I have really internalized the logic. I don't remember how to solve the puzzle by the time I start. I may not remember the break-in, so
Right.
I have to start over, and it gives me a kind of a unique, a new perspective on my puzzles as a solver instead of a setter, and
Hmm.
it will have me a fair amount of the time lamenting that I can't solve my own puzzle because I can't remember the thought process to get to the next step.
Right. Okay, so I have some rapid fire questions. So answer one or the other really quickly. Local
Sure.
or global deductions.
Global deductions.
Coloring or good living.
Yeah, a good lift coloring.
Yeah, I was gonna say both. uh, Geometric or arithmetic.
Yes. Depends on the puzzle.
Okay. Penpa or F puzzles.
Depends on the puzzle. I've gotten much more familiar with pen paw recently, and I really like it.
Sudoku or pencil puzzles.
Sudoku for me.
Okay. Chaos or order in general.
It's gotta be chaos. Chaos but symmetry is my
Chaos
answer.
but symmetry. Uh, Organized chaos. Cages or lines.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Okay. Um, that's all the rapid fire questions.
Awesome.
Did we miss any questions from? Oh, yes, we missed a very important question from the audience. Turganis asked, "How many puzzles have you made?"
Well, the real answer for that is that I've only set one puzzle, but it's in 5 dimensions. So every puzzle that I post, just different slice through it.
Okay,
Um,
makes
but
sense.
uh, I have no idea. Honestly, it's a ridiculously huge number.
Right.
Because there's a fair number that haven't made it to testing, and I've posted 200 in testing.
Yeah.
Um,
Over 200, like
so
240. I didn't know how many were duplicates, so I just said 200 plus.
yeah, actually not that many duplicates. I often don't post duplicates. I will post puzzles that I don't end up archiving because I end up thinking that I don't really like them. Um, that happens. I've also posted a lot that I haven't archived because I stopped archiving so much because I couldn't be bothered. So I got
Yeah.
lazy. Yes, exactly, Pancake. Exactly. My
Um,
brain is a variant Sudoku, hyper cube. So
that's
it's
what I was gonna say.
just taking bits out of it.
Have you ever tried setting non-Sudoku?
Yes, I used to set nanograms, and I've set a few of them. I set an Akari once, and I've set a couple of double Chacos.
Mm-hmm.
I find it. I'm so used to setting Sudoku that it's hard for me to set pencil puzzles, and I would need to be willing to be bad at it for a while. But my brain is in a Sudoku groove, so I've kind of just been running with that. Maybe I'll start setting pencil puzzles in the future. Who knows?
Right. How do you come up with your puzzle names?
Um, I don't know. I just kind of look at the grid and inspires and the becomes the title. I do that for other people too. People will ask me for titles for their puzzles. I just whatever makes sense. It's a holistic process.
And what's your best puzzle name?
My best puzzle name is a puzzle name that I had to get rid of because it needed to be. I don't remember why. I think it was part of a pack or something. And I
Oh,
had to. Oh yeah, it was a puzzle I set for the 7x7 pack, and I had to change the title because I ended up renaming them all after westerns because that was the theme of the pack, like the aesthetics of the pack. But the my best puzzle title ever was a 7x7 Renban. I think there was something else, I don't remember which, but the the title was 789, like the ATE, and it worked on so many levels because it was a 7x7 and 8 and 9 were both gone. Oh, it was a Renban sandwich, that's why. And so it was a sandwich, so that it was a 9 sandwich.
right, yeah.
It was just it worked on so many levels. I'm really proud of the title. I was
Well, you can reuse that. You just need to make a 7x7 sandwich where you can reuse that.
it won't be the same though. It won't be the same. That other puzzle is 789, and yeah, it would be yeah, yes, 7 takes the place of 9 as the crust of the sandwich. It was just perfect. I was so proud when I came up with that title name.
You said you've been solving more recently. I have noticed that you don't solve as much as other setters. Is there like a reason for that?
Yeah,
Because you set a lot.
yes. The past month or so, I've had other stuff going on, and so I had to take a break for a little while with solving. But earlier this year, there was a period of time where I would just start solving tons and tons of stuff from testing in VC1, and even before then, I try to test puzzles. I don't have as much time as I used to, but I do try to just keep up with my solving because there's so many great puzzles out there. I don't want to miss them.
Right. All right. Well, we're almost wrapped up here, so I'll ask what Riff Clown wants to know, wants to hear about. I'm sure he's heard about it before, but he wants you to say it publicly. Tell us about your code in space.
So I the from 2016 to 2021, I was working at the Space Telescope Science Institute, working on the James Webb Space Telescope. So since that has launched, some of my code, I'm not sure if any of my code is physically on the spacecraft because a lot of that stuff had its own dedicated code base, but definitely my code was involved in getting it up there and making sure that the instrument I worked on was functioning properly.
Nice.
So yeah, the question of how do I decide what to solve? I'll just scroll through testing and see if there's something that looks interesting in terms of rule set and layout. Also, if there's particular setters who I know who puzzles I tend to enjoy, I will jump in on those. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to ask. Was there anything that we missed that you'd like to
For people
yeah,
who came in late, I hope that you will check out my Patreon.
yes.
There's a link
Link
in
in the
the
description.
in the stream description. Yeah, and I think it's gonna be fun. I have one. I only started it a couple weeks ago, and I have one puzzle. My next puzzle is gonna be out on Monday. Um, One puzzle and a solving video and a.
And I think there's also the banner puzzle, which is like an
Oh
extra
yes, the
like
banner. The
bonus.
banner is freely available.
Yeah.
It is a solvable puzzle, and I think it actually turned out really, really well.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So go solve that.
I don't know.
Go support him on Patreon, all that stuff. And if you enjoyed this content, subscribe for more.
Like the stream.
Yes, like the stream as well. Even afterwards helps as well. And comment, because the YouTube algorithm, you know. I don't know if I haven't scheduled the next interview or next setter spotlight, but it's with someone very exciting, which I have mentioned that it's someone very exciting. And Grackles knows because I told him. So maybe I'll give you the honor of announcing who the next setter we're interviewing is.
Sure. The next setter that will be interviewed is Fistamafel.
And we haven't scheduled that yet, but it will be coming soon.
So stay tuned.
Yeah, stay tuned. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed, because you'll miss it if you haven't.
Yeah,
Anyways,
it's really, really cool.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. And this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much, Grackles. It was amazing to hear your thoughts and all your experiences and all your wisdom.
This was tons of fun, and I will be watching this space to see the next one.
Indeed. Yeah, I'll watch it too. I mean, I'll probably watch it back a couple times to see what a fool I made of myself or something.
All right, bye everyone.
Bye. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.